We've generated over 200% Bitcoin yield. We have like a $111 million BTC dollar gain. That's powerful. That's the highest yielding way to buy Bitcoin. We're definitely determined to drive for scale in the size of our Bitcoin holdings. Right now we're at about $500 million in Bitcoin. He also happens to own a lot of Bitcoin. He's, I think, said that 90% of his net worth is in Bitcoin. So we share a lot in common. When you think about MNAV, like for Metaplanet example, their MNAV isn't as high as you think because they're so aggressively. What do I think of all of this? I think it's.
What's up, guys? Before we get started, I've realized that over 50,000 of you guys keep coming back for every single episode. And while I'm eternally grateful for you guys to keep coming back, I've realized that 79% of you guys are not subscribed. So I have one small ask before we get started. If you guys could hit that subscribe button and hit that like button to help send this interview and many more to the stratosphere, it would be greatly appreciated. All right, enough from me. Let's get into the show. Bing bong. I am back with another edition of the State of Bitcoin podcast where I've got the man, the myth, the legend, Eric Semler in the house. So you were one of the first companies to follow in Michael Saylor's footsteps. So I think it's very interesting that we are seeing all of these corporations now start to almost follow in your footsteps and start to emulate that strategy. So what do you take of all of these other corporations starting to come on and essentially develop this strategy led by Michael Saylor and then yourself and all of these other corporations?
It's great to be here.
Yeah,
Thank you.
of course.
And awesome to be in Prague, which is one of my favorite cities. And this conference, BTC Prague, is just starting today. So I'm really fired up for that and glad to start it this way. What do I think of all of this? I think it's mind-blowing. I think it's amazing, like the acceleration. I just read about a few new ones yesterday. And the reactions are interesting, too, to how the stocks trade, post the announcement. I think it's great. I mean, look, this is what we were hoping for. We were hoping to have all of these companies make these announcements because underlying it is this belief that Bitcoin, balance sheets should be denominated in Bitcoin, and that's happening, and it's happening kind of from the ground level up. It's happening with companies that need a lifeline, so to speak. They are tend to be companies that are not as healthy as the typical Mag 7 stock. And so that's got to be where it starts. Makes sense. It's logical to me. And I think it'll just continue. And there will be, this huge premium on differentiation and why would I own your Bitcoin treasury stock over another? But at the end of the day, they should all benefit from the fact that Bitcoin is becoming more institutionalized, it's becoming more valuable, and that, the downside scenario is that Bitcoin just increases and these companies own a good stash of Bitcoin and should perform well.
Yeah, and so I think that's the way things are going, right? I mean, more of these companies are going to hold more Bitcoin and then it's going to go up, right? I always like to talk about the MSTR flywheel, so to speak, right? So MicroStrategy keeps issuing more debt to buy more Bitcoin. The Bitcoin price goes up, MSTR's market cap goes up, their weight in indices go up, so on and so forth. How are you guys viewing, putting more Bitcoin on the balance sheet and kind of working towards that? Are you guys trying to implement some strategies and almost copy, or are you looking at it kind of in a different light?
I think we're definitely determined to drive for scale in the size of our Bitcoin holdings. Right now, we're at about $500 million in Bitcoin after starting a year ago. And I think that we have a pretty clear roadmap of how we're going to do it. So far, we've done it really a third through our operating cash flow of our healthcare business, a third through convertible debt raise, and a third through ATM issuances. There are other areas like preferreds that Michael has really successfully started to break into that are really appealing because they're very high-yielding types of capital raising opportunities to buy Bitcoin accretively. So I think there's a lot we can do and we're working on that will enable us to own a lot more Bitcoin than we own. I think our goal is to really convey to the market what our roadmap is, and we're working on that. Another big piece of this is growing our team and just bringing in more expertise into the Bitcoin treasury group and the building our connection, an even stronger connection with the Bitcoin community. We did that by bringing Natalie Brunell on our board, but there will be some other people joining that will help us kind of strengthen that. So all of these different factors, I think, are going to allow us to get to a much, much larger arsenal of Bitcoin.
That's awesome. Well, we were kind of talking about this a little bit pre-show, right? Where I think the unique aspect of what you guys have is, like, we were talking about the MNAV, kind of like the Bitcoin premium, so to speak. You're seeing Metaplanet trade at 8, 9 times. MSTR is like, maybe 2-ish right now. And you guys are floating a little bit above that 1. So, why do you think that you haven't seen that giant MNAV premium that everybody's like so talking about on Twitter for you guys just yet?
Yeah, well, it varies. I mean, I think that the two best premium examples are Metaplanet and MicroStrategy, and then it kind of falls off from there, I believe. I would love to be, at a higher MNAV, and I think there are a lot of explanations for perhaps why we're not, trading at a higher MNAV. But I think that when you think about MNAV, like for Metaplanet example, they have done such a phenomenal job of proving to the market that they're really not trading. If you look out, into the future, their MNAV isn't as high as you think because they're so aggressively buying Bitcoin at accretive levels that it's, if you think about it on a long-term basis, it's kind of a time arbitrage type of analysis. They're growing into that multiple very quickly, just the way that, a lot of these great companies over decades like Microsoft and NVIDIA and Google and others, where they always seem to trade at a high multiple of earnings or cash flow, but in fact, the multiple wasn't as high as you thought because they grew so much faster than the market anticipated. And I think that's what's happening with Metaplanet and MicroStrategy. And I think that we should be doing that too. So I think we've had to pause at times on our Bitcoin purchases just because we were, had an earnings blackout, or we had, issues with our healthcare business where we weren't allowed to, be in the market. So that's kind of held us back a little bit. But and the SEC for months held us back on our ATM approval. It's just part of the some of the obstacles and hurdles you have to go through when you do this, which maybe a lot of Bitcoin treasury companies who are entering this need to kind of think about. But I'm really proud of the fact that we've gotten as far as we have in a year. We own 500 million Bitcoin, roughly. We've generated over 200% Bitcoin yield. We have like a $111 million BTC dollar gain on our purchases, and that's not too shabby. And maybe we are. Maybe we deserve a higher MNAV just for that. But you'll see us, making moves that will hopefully convince the market that we should trade at a higher MNAV. Perhaps that's just by, building a stronger team of people that are connected to the Bitcoin community. Perhaps that is by finding clever ways to raise capital that aren't that are accretive and that will help us buy Bitcoin accretively. And so we're exploring a lot of opportunities like that. And I just love being an underdog. I've been an underdog my whole life. I think that's a great position to be in. I think that these types of situations where you see value creation opportunities and that you feel you're undervalued are the kind of things I relish.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think so, and I'm rooting for you as
Thanks.
well. But I think it's interesting that you just brought on Natalie Brunell, right? We were kind of talking about this a little bit. How Metaplanet has Dylan. Semler obviously is like the head, and he's kind of that marketing arm. How critical do you think that's going to be, not only just from, her helping you guys out and kind of helping develop that, but kind of getting more connected with the Bitcoin community and getting in there? Because I was telling you pre-show, I think like you guys are kind of the underdog. Everybody's always talking about MSTR and Metaplanet, but Semler Scientific is the sleeper. And that was kind of my theory why I think like maybe you aren't trading at as high of an MNAV just yet. Because like you said, I mean, $500 million in Bitcoin, and seeing 111 million in the gains, the BTC yield, that's nothing to slouch at.
No.
And all of that in a year. So with that success, I'm just curious, like, do you think that that's going to help bring you guys to the eyes of more people in the Bitcoin space?
Yeah, I do. I think Natalie's already had a big impact. I think she is really just doing a phenomenal job of getting the Semler story out there through podcasts. The other day, she interviewed Dylan LeClaire, and they talked about Semler Scientific, and he said some very positive, supportive things about us. And he's always just been a great, comrade in this effort. Just amazing resource for me. And I know he believes in what we're doing, so that's great. So the more we can kind of, congeal with the important influencers in the space, I think that's important. I do think that probably the intense headwinds we felt in our healthcare business have really held us back, and we haven't given up on healthcare just because we do have some very promising products out there. One is in the FDA that if it's approved, we're hoping sometime late this year or early next year that that could spur some massive opportunity for us in the healthcare space, and we don't want to give up on that. And if that works and that coincides with a downturn or a flattening of Bitcoin, as just the typical cycle, we could look really, really good to the market. We could have a very good two-pronged narrative story, and so that's why we're not so concerned about our healthcare business and the headwinds it's created, because we see opportunity there, and we see it as a buffer if Bitcoin goes through its typical cyclical downturn.
What if I told you never had to sell your Bitcoin? Instead, you can borrow against it with Salt Lending. Why give up your hard-earned Bitcoin when you can unlock its value without letting it go? With Salt, you get secure Bitcoin collateralized loans with no credit checks, no prepayment fees, and best of all, no rehypothecation. Salt has had 0 customer collateral losses since it launched. Salt was the first platform to offer Bitcoin collateralized loans starting way back in 2016. Today, they offer tailored options for both individuals and businesses. And now introducing Salt Shield, the no liquidation solution. No forced liquidations during the lifetime of your loan when you're enrolled with Salt Shield. This just launched at the Bitcoin conference in Las Vegas, and it is next level peace of mind. For Green Candle listeners only, head to saltlending.com/green-candle for this exclusive offer for your Bitcoin collateralized loan. You can get cash for your Bitcoin today. Salt Lending, secure, trusted, proven. Yeah, and I think that's something that's unique, right? Because we have a lot of Bitcoin treasury companies basically coming out and saying, hey, this is it. We're going to raise a bunch of money. We're going to buy Bitcoin. Now, talk a little bit more about the healthcare and how you think that's going to play in, and maybe some of the difficulties that you guys are facing right now, because I do think this is essentially revolutionizing the way businesses have been run. Like at first, during the cerveza sickness in 2020, right, we had everybody was saying cash is king. Now it almost seems like everybody's saying Bitcoin is king. You need to have Bitcoin on the balance sheet. You need to do these things. But few actual businesses have done that. I mean, we saw, GameStop dip their toe in a little bit. You guys obviously are one as well. But what do you think of the differences between these corporations who are putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet strictly to just buy more Bitcoin, and then the difference to the way you're looking at it, where it's like, hey, Bitcoin is helping prop up the healthcare business, maybe give us some more runway, that aspect of things?
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting aspects to that. I mean, when we started this, we had $60 million of cash on our balance sheet from our healthcare business. We took that cash and bought Bitcoin. Then we continued to generate about $5 million of cash flow from our healthcare business every quarter until recently, and bought Bitcoin. That's powerful. That's the highest yielding way to buy Bitcoin. And that's why we traded at a much higher MNAV then, because we were doing it, I think, in the best, most accretive way. And we need to get back to that. And when you think about what our healthcare business is, it is basically a business set up to combat chronic disease. You also think about what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is promoting. It's chronic disease, combating chronic disease. He's trying to start an agency for that single purpose, and that's what we're about. So it would make sense that his interests are aligned with ours. He also happens to own a lot of Bitcoin. He has, I think, said that 90% of his net worth is in Bitcoin. So we share a lot in common. We have this strong desire to combat chronic disease through our products, and we also are a Bitcoin treasury company. And it just seems inevitable and logical to me that we would get a lot of support from the government, which is what we've lacked. The problem we've had in our healthcare business is that we have a device called QuantaFlow that is used for early detection of a very serious chronic disease called PAD, or peripheral artery disease. And PAD PAD is a silent killer. It's asymptomatic in most people who have it. So you could be a young person, not know you have it. You could be an older person, not know you have it, and you need to be screened for it. Our device was really the only device on the market that could screen it in a few minutes and tell you whether you have this disease. Now, if you have this disease, you have a 3 times higher chance of having a stroke, a heart attack, an amputation, death, and so you really need this kind of this screening process. And it's we think it's saved hundreds of thousands of lives, this early screening for PAD, and there was some blowback. Not against us specifically, but Senator Elizabeth Warren, a few years ago had pushed hard against the reimbursements that were happening in Medicare Advantage, and a lot of that has gotten a lot of publicity. But our customers are the big insurers in the Medicare Advantage business. They love our product. They've made a lot of money on our product, and for good reason. It's a great product, and she led an effort to get CMS, which oversees the Medicare Advantage reimbursement, to curb testing of asymptomatic PAD, which is basically we were affected by those changes in the reimbursement codes, and that kind of, if you can believe this, actually caused basically asymptomatic screening to go away this year. And that was a massive headwind for us because our revenues are declining as that's being phased out. Interestingly, though, it's still being tested, even though the reimbursements aren't the same, just because I think our customers believe it's a really valuable product. So our revenues are continuing to show up, but it's still, the reimbursement incentive isn't what it was before. We think that the government, we think the current government, especially the HHS and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., would be aghast if they knew that this was going away, given their agenda. So that's something that we're hoping, and we're not holding our breath, but we're hoping that there will be an opportunity to revive PAD reimbursement. So that's something we're working hard on. And then but the real hope for us, the real opportunity, I should say, is that we're using this same device called QuantaFlow to test people for heart disease, early detection of heart disease, which is a much bigger addressable market than PAD. And that product is what we're asking the FDA for is just kind of a software tweak to it, and if that's approved, which we're hoping will be the case, we should be able to really get back to where we were in terms of our financials. So in like 2016, 2015, for 5 years in that time period, we were like one of the best performing stocks in the world. Just on this one product for PAD, our stock was up 13,500% in 5 years, better than MicroStrategy. Over a 5-year period.
Yeah.
We had a 136-fold increase in our stock. It was like a forever stock. The people who owned it would never sell it, and it was just a great story, great business. We were saving lives, high margins. Our customers loved us, and it was beautiful until Elizabeth Warren kind of stepped in. But our heart disease product, if it's approved, wouldn't face the same reimbursement restrictions. So that's what we're excited about, and that could probably be a 2026, 27 story for us, which would coincide perhaps with a bear market in Bitcoin, or even if it doesn't, it'll kind of be a buffer for us to buy Bitcoin accretively.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, I mean, Elizabeth Warren was big against Bitcoin and then was big against you guys as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, RFK is, kind of intertwined with both of those. So I'm curious, did all of this, the Bitcoin community is very health conscious, right? The carnivore diet has come through. is this kind of how you found the Bitcoin space, or was it just more of like seeing the MSTR, like the success that he's having, and then your run up almost being compared to that in the stocks? So I'm curious which way you kind of found Bitcoin with all of that.
I found Bitcoin. I found the Bitcoin treasury strategy compelling because of what Michael Saylor had done. Combined with the just rising institutionalization, the ETFs, the change in government, all of those things have made me just very excited about being a Bitcoin treasury company. I've been a believer in Bitcoin for years before that and an investor in it, but the idea of a Bitcoin treasury company, really, I have to say Michael was the driver for that. And I was stunned in studying this in early 24 that no one had tried to copy him. No one had tried to follow in his footsteps. It just kind of stunned me that with all the success he's had, no one copied him. And he was so welcoming about it too. When I approached him and got in contact with him, he was just such a cheerleader and supporter of what we were trying to do. The healthcare thing, it's interesting. It didn't factor into our decision at all. We just thought that we needed to find a way to use all this cash we were building up on our balance sheet from QuantaFlow to find a business to acquire that would help us kind of reignite growth. And we couldn't find anything that made any sense, with a clear return other than Bitcoin. And so that's why we did that. And we didn't do it when we didn't make that decision to adopt the Bitcoin standard because we had some financial engineering concept in place. I'll be honest with you, I didn't really fully appreciate what Michael was doing. How not complex, but how he was capturing this arbitrage. I knew a little bit about it, but I didn't understand the full extent of it. I just thought we should own Bitcoin instead of cash. Bitcoin is just a much better, way to weaponize our balance sheet than having cash on our balance sheet, which is kind of, degrading. So, that as simple as that. And that's kind of where we are today, So you're saying we're trading at a low MNAV, but, we own a lot of Bitcoin. And I just think Bitcoin has massive upside for so many different reasons that I feel great about that. Like the risk reward of that is fantastic. And yes, we have a healthcare business that's been struggling, but we have a very promising product out there that, if it's approved, could really jumpstart the other side of our business. And then we might be one of the few truly healthy, two-sided Bitcoin treasury company stories. So, yeah, we're an underdog, but you never know what could happen in a year.
Yeah, 100%. So I've got two questions for that because, one, I think you're talking about how it's revolutionized the way you're looking at your business. So, how has that changed? One, and then two, because you guys are at like a low MNAV and, you have the two-sided business, do you think like the Wall Street or traditional finance has essentially figured out how to value you guys? Because that's where I feel like you guys are, you're the underdog, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't think it's come yet. So how has it helped your business? Just do you think it's given you guys more runway? Because I think, like you said, good spot to have a lot of Bitcoin, undervalued stock. And then two, do you think it's just TradFi just hasn't figured it out yet?
Yeah, it's really interesting questions. First of all, Bitcoin has saved our business. It has given us strength and a foundation at a time when we've really faced headwinds that have taken us to break even cash flow from very plentiful cash flow. So thank you to Bitcoin for doing that for us. That Bitcoin has been a savior for us, and I think it's going to get us through this period in our healthcare business and bridge it to a really much more positive period. That's the way I think about it. So in terms of the TradFi guys, I'm very connected to that world too, because I spent most of my career as a hedge fund investor and following companies. I still do. I still meet with companies all the time, and it's interesting because more and more companies come to my office now, traditional companies, and actually ask me how to do a Bitcoin treasury strategy, like really big, high cash flowing companies. And it's kind of shocking to me, like I thought you were here to tell, you're coming into my office and I was going to learn about your casino business. No, I want to know about your Bitcoin treasury strategy. So that is a real change. So that in the traditional world, there's a keen awareness of it. There is massive skepticism against the MNAV concept. Like I can't tell you how many conversations I hear from very smart, sophisticated people that the premium makes no sense, and I try to defend that as best I can, but there's a lot of resistance to that idea. I'm sure there's a lot of people betting against Bitcoin treasury companies now because of that. I think that's the opportunity in a lot of ways, because, like you said, we're undervalued. I think we are, and so maybe some of them come around to saying, well, these guys, maybe this is the way it should be. They should be trading around a 1 mNAV or a little higher than that. And we should have, get some credit for a healthcare business. And on that basis, the risk reward is not bad if you believe in Bitcoin. So maybe we're not as big a target of theirs as some of the higher multiple ones, which is typical of hedge funds and, people who are tend to be cynical and skeptical, especially of Bitcoin. But so that's kind of where people sit. But there's just massive resistance to the idea of a mNAV premium among kind of your mainstream, hedge fund investor, at least.
Yeah, so I'm curious, do you think, you talked about how you guys were one of the best performing stocks, not too long ago.
Right.
And then you've recently developed this Bitcoin strategy. Do you think there's a lot of your shareholders that just have no idea what's going on with the Bitcoin strategy, or do you think everybody's relatively aware what you guys are doing, at least from your shareholders' perspective?
It's always hard to know. Last count, we had 30,000 shareholders.
Yeah.
And so most of them are really, I think they're not interested in the healthcare story per se. They don't want it to get in the way or be a hindrance, but they're really focused on us as a Bitcoin treasury story. And that's what they want to see us. They want to see us grow in that area. I think I'm sure they'd love to hear positive news about healthcare just as it relates to helping us buy more Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. But I think the focus should be and is on, Bitcoin treasury and growing our Bitcoin reserves.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. So now let's get back to what you were saying about all of these corporations and major big players coming into your office, because this bull run, I'm looking for ways to stack Bitcoin in my sleep, and mining has always caught my eye. I've partnered with the guys over at Simple Mining to help you do just that. I don't recommend anything that I don't use personally, so I've got a machine up and running with them right this second. And they've even opened the facility up so anyone can go and visit. They manage over 15,000 machines for 500 clients, handling all of the maintenance and repairs so you don't have to. And for the Green Candle listeners, they're giving an exclusive offer. All the repairs for the first year for free. So if you've been thinking about mining, head on over to simpleminer.io/greencandle to get this exclusive offer and learn about the potential tax benefits that you can get from mining with Simple Mining. All right, enough from me. Let's get back to the show. I feel like not too long ago, that was potentially you with Michael Saylor, right? You said he's been a great helping hand. Now the chairs are switched. How does that feel? Now you're almost like a veteran in this space doing all that. So
I know.
How does that feel? Do you think are you still all right, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm dipping my toes in, starting to figure it out? Or, have you just had the great mentorship from Michael Saylor and kind of, still feel like, this is the right play. I love the Bitcoin community, what it stands for and everything. And we've seen it revolutionize our business, so you'd like to help out all these other corporations.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm as excited about it as I've ever been. I'm probably more excited now just because it's getting a little more complex, and I like the complexity of that and the opportunity to figure out a way to win. When it's not so clear. It's just something I'm drawn to as an investor. I think it's how you can make more money than if you just kind of do what everybody else is doing. You tend to make less when you win. So if we can win here, we'll win much bigger. A part of that is we're more levered than almost every other Bitcoin treasury company. So if Bitcoin continues to rise, we should under the laws of finance, we should go up a lot more. And so that's one aspect of it. Michael Saylor's incredible. I mean, just I've never flinched from believing in him. He's just he belongs. There should be 4 of him on the Bitcoin of the Mount Rushmore of Bitcoin. It's hard to imagine anybody else on that mountain except him. He is just leading the path, and you'd be kind of foolish not to follow him. I think that it is starting to look like companies are being kind of reckless without doing the strategy. I think the more it kind of normalizes, becomes the norm to do a Bitcoin treasury strategy, it'll come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. I think it will be, we'll look back on this and say, wow, we were a real pioneer. Even though Michael was the true pioneer, we had the courage to do this when no one else was doing it, and to take a risk and, potentially alienate our shareholder base, who was wasn't focused on the Bitcoin treasury strategy. We just dared to do it. We thought it made a lot of sense, and it's generated a good return. Our return on it has been higher, but since we started a year ago, our stock's up 40%. That's not like what we want, because we were up a lot more, but it's still better than the S&P.
It's crazy, man, that people are talking. I was having this conversation with somebody earlier where it was like, I had a buddy when I first kind of got into Bitcoin, maybe like around 2020 time, when he was telling me, I bought the S&P, but it only went up by 20%. It's crazy to me that we're saying 40%, I mean, it's like, man, we're seeing these things just like shoot up like crazy. But, I do think it's interesting of all the markets that Bitcoin is starting to kind of dip its toe into, right? I mean, we've got the lending products coming out. We've got, potentially some real estate type of mortgages. But Wells Fargo actually said this out loud, which I thought was crazy, that the unsung hero of the Bitcoin 2025 story is dipping its toe into the $300 trillion bond market. And that's all because of what Saylor's doing with the Stride and those products. So how do you view that aspect, like essentially utilizing these traditional financial tools in order to acquire more Bitcoin? I know you guys you talked about like a third of it is towards that. Do you think that that's going to, expand in your business? And how do you think that these products that Semler is now just kind of putting to the forefront is going to revolutionize maybe the way you guys are thinking about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. It definitely provides a really good roadmap for us. I think the preferred market is really interesting. I think the stuff you're hearing him say about kind of the long-term accretive nature of it is really compelling, and it is something we're very focused on, and that's something I hope we'll be able to get into at some point. We were the first Bitcoin treasury company to do a standard convert, where we went out on a road show and through Cantor raised $100 million. I don't know if anybody's really done that in the Bitcoin treasury space since we did in February. I mean, you've seen some converts announced, but they're more like privately placed, arranged. So we broke ground there. I think that's an area where we could return to at some point. We're definitely more focused on those types of things now that our MNAV's lower. So because those are more accretive. Those would be, ways to generate higher yield on our Bitcoin purchases if we were able to do those. So those, we're looking at all our options. There's a lot of interest, and it's kind of controversial, but that's something we're exploring. Is also just yield maximization, trying to generate yield on our Bitcoin. A lot of people, there's very, it's kind of a controversial topic. It's risky to some degree, and we're trying to figure out ways to do it that could help us generate income to buy Bitcoin. I think Metaplanet's done a great job with that.
Yeah, so you brought up MNAV, like Bitcoin yield. Like, is this something that you guys are looking at just like internally, kind of like where your stock's at, and using some of these like newer metrics, I guess is what we can kind of call them. It's not like the the traditional investing kind of things, like the PE ratios or anything like that. It's like seeming like all of this, like Bitcoin per share, it's like a term that didn't exist like 2 or 3 months ago. And now, everybody's kind of talking about that. Are you guys looking at those kind of things as you're going through this journey?
Yeah, we are. We believe in those metrics. We've adopted them. We have a dashboard on our website that shows them in real time. So you'll see Bitcoin yield, BTC gain, applied volatility, things that we think are really critical to the story, and help investors see how accretive our purchases are. I think is important, and shows our MNAV and things like that. So yeah, we're fully on board, and we'll continue to let those types of metrics guide our decisions.
I gotcha. Now, what do you like? I mean, we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, about all these new corporations coming on. It seems like, there's 300, 350, Bitcoin produce every single day. I mean, the amount of Bitcoin on exchanges, there's about like 2 million left. I mean, it seems like, this plan is going to work out the best for the people that get in early.
Yeah.
Obviously, like you hope that that's the case. But is it something that almost like worries you a little bit, where you see like all of these guys coming in and it's like, all right, well, maybe we're going to have, a flee to the bank, so to speak, and everybody's just rushing in, and then maybe we get some people, some bad actors or something like that. Maybe somebody's taking too much risk. Some of these potential downfalls. Is there something that you guys are looking at just from like a global market? Or are you just focused and streamlined in, hey, we're going to be smart about it, we're going to stick to the strategy and just go that way? Like, how are you looking at the overall shape of the market as it's developing?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you have a gold rush like this, it's a Bitcoin rush. There's going to be some fallout. That has to be, right. It's too frenzied almost in a way. It's great because it drives demand for Bitcoin. And it's probably inevitable that most companies in the world are going to be on the Bitcoin standard at some point. So this is kind of giving you an early window into that. But anytime you have like this onrush of companies that are not super healthy, so a lot of them are just very small companies buying Bitcoin and it is something to be wary of, right? I agree with you on that. But we'll just continue doing what we're doing. We got a great head start. We have a lot of experience. I think that's undervalued too. I think there's a lot of potholes along the way. Even in a year, there's been a lot, and I think that those types of what has not killed you has made you stronger moments are really valuable. It's not all peaches and balloons. So but I think we'll just continue doing what we're doing. I think that inevitably there will be consolidation, right? There's going to be companies getting bought based on the value of the Bitcoin holdings or the businesses that they're in. If there's a way that you could accretively buy another company with a lot of Bitcoin, if they're trading a low MNAV and you're trading a high MNAV, and there's a relatively seamless way to put the companies together, and there might be synergies in the non-Bitcoin side of it, that's interesting, right? And so you could see M&A, consolidate. When I say consolidation, I mean like companies buying each other in the same space. That's usually what happens when you get into this very crowded kind of scenario where there's a lot of companies that don't have scale and kind of either can't survive or get gobbled up.
Yeah, and I think it's unique, right? Because you talked about starting this about a year ago, right? Yeah. A year ago, we were not in the, hey, everybody's into Bitcoin type of places, right? Like, you got to think we had, President Biden at that time, like, Elizabeth Warren, who we talked about a little bit earlier. There was like a little crossroads at that point where it was like, hey, you know what? If this election goes a different direction, things are completely different. Now, obviously, we had the election go with President Trump, and they've been very crypto-friendly, so to speak. And I think that's the way like it shifted. But, was there any sort of worry at that time where it's like, hey, you know what? We've got Elizabeth Warren coming at us for our healthcare business, and then also, the potential of some of this falling out.
Yeah.
And obviously, Saylor's got his influence and everything like that, but you guys took a good sized risk there, and it's paid off. But what was that like, basically?
Yeah. So first of all, Elizabeth Warren didn't come after us directly. She came after our customers, which affected us.
Yeah.
I just want to clear that up. Just give her a little bit of credit. Take a little pressure off of that comment. But it was really, people forget. There was, just as an example, we announced a strategy. We bought Bitcoin, and then we applied for, I think, $150 million shelf filing ATM, to sell shares to buy Bitcoin. The SEC just gave us the runaround. It was Gary Gensler's SEC this last summer, just back and forth, same question. So tell us more about your Bitcoin treasury strategy. Every question was about the Bitcoin treasury strategy. No questions really about our healthcare business. And it got to be kind of repetitive. There were several rounds of back and forth, and it felt at some point, like a few months into this, it just felt like, oh, they're never going to allow us to do this. and I was kind of stunned when they finally approved it. So fast forward to, I think in February, we filed for a $500 million ATM with the SEC, and it was almost instantly approved with no review. That's the difference.
Yeah.
So yes, if we had the same administration, if the same type of SEC, you wouldn't see this flurry of Bitcoin treasury companies. I think that partly explains why it's happening finally now. Before, the SEC would have been a massive obstacle for so many companies if it was still this kind of same regime.
Yeah, and it's definitely like you said, you had to go through some of the pitfalls, and hopefully some of those are now behind, like not only you but everybody. And as we see the administration start to develop this, but we've talked a little bit about your previous experience in the TradFi world, how now people are coming to you there, right?
Yeah.
So, is TradFi like really equipped, you think, for understanding the Bitcoin space? Because I've always kind of had the feeling, or like the general sense is like, it doesn't really benefit them to understand Bitcoin, but now it kind of does, right? Because you're having like all of these different, corporations put Bitcoin on the balance sheet, and then obviously BlackRock with the IBIT ETF. Like, how revolutionary do you think, or how important do you think the ETFs were just from getting the TradFi world into Bitcoin? And do you think that had a big factor, or what do you think has got? Are they even here yet?
Yeah, it's hard to say. They're definitely here.
Okay, so you've discovered Bitcoin and are on the path to financial self-sovereignty. But simply holding Bitcoin is not enough. You need to make sure that it's scored properly and you are in 100% control over all your assets. So sharing your keys with third parties and taking on that counterparty risk is not the answer. The answer is pure and simple. It's uncompromising self-custody, and there's no better way to do it than the Bitcoin way. They've got over 25 years of cybersecurity experience, and their team of experts can help you properly self-custody your Bitcoin, secure your digital life, configure your privacy phones, and even establish a Plan B residency if you're looking to do so. So I'm going to help you guys out here and give you a free consultation if you take the first step and visit thebitcoinway.com/green candle, and you can check out the boys at the Bitcoin Way and see how they can help you become self-sovereign.
It's hard to say, what inning they're in. I think Larry Fink's kind of orange pilling and BlackRock is probably the single most important factor in changing the mindset of the traditional finance world. I think that's so powerful, and we've seen that in the inflows into the ETF. I think that it's going to be a gradual acceptance. It's very difficult if you're a really strong company, right? If you're one of these Mag 7 companies, or a company that's just having terrific growth and profitability, to see any need to do this, because I think it's still perceived as risky to develop a Bitcoin treasury strategy. I think it's perceived as volatile. I think that boards are kind of looking for cover. They don't want to rock the boat. And I think there's still this perception in boardrooms that Bitcoin is rocking the boat. We saw that with Meta, right? Recently, Microsoft's board didn't give Saylor the time of day, unfortunately, even though he tried really hard to convince them. It's still so early in the progression of that, and I guess that goes hand in hand with the way TradFi thinks. They don't want to take undue risk. They'd rather, people just are wedded to things that, to the status quo. It's very hard for people to latch onto a mega trend early. It's unnerving. It's kind of, it ruffles the establishment too much. And so that's the opportunity, right? When you're one of these people on the forefront and you see it and you do it, and you really believe it has this massive upside, and people don't appreciate the opportunity. They're kind of overestimating the risk and underestimating the opportunity, which is one of my favorite expressions. And so that's where we're at. People are underestimating the opportunity and overestimating the risk, and that's, I'd say, the consensus view among TradFi and the boardroom.
Now, you say the word risk, right? I
Yeah,
mean, when I first got into Bitcoin, that's exactly what I thought, right? I mean, it's
yeah,
volatile. You're perceiving it
yeah.
as risk. As time has gone on for me personally, I don't see it as a risk anymore, right? It's just like, all right, this is something where I don't necessarily have to be a hedge fund manager, so to speak, you know, research all of the, different, earnings and all these other kinds of quote risk or whatever.
Hmm.
I could just buy Bitcoin or maybe look at some of these companies who are, similarly minded to myself.
Yeah.
Now, has your thought around Bitcoin almost shifted as like similar to what I'm lining out here, where at first maybe you're like, all right, this is a risk, but hey, let's go for it? Or were you always kind of like, all right, we've seen the success with Sailor. This is not a risk. This is actually the right play. Like, when you were first getting into it, what was your mindset around it?
I definitely thought it was risky when I first got into it. I think that when we first announced that we bought 60 million of Bitcoin last May, and like literally the day we finished, the Mount Gox distribution news came out, and Bitcoin plunged pretty quickly, like 20%. And I had to look at the board and say, sorry guys.
Yeah.
They were cool about it. They were like, we got to buy more, which is phenomenal. But yeah, I think that it evolves, right? It evolves for all of us. I probably got to it much later than you. And I just feel like every day I feel better about the risk involved. I feel better that it's less risky. I think that it's partly just seeing all these announcements, but seeing the government support, the institutionalization, the rise in the inflows into the ETFs, the BlackRock support, like all of these things are getting reinforced. And it's interesting because I've been an investor in the stock market for almost 30 years now. I've never seen so much attention focused on deficits and the macro and the real concerns about our future and the level of debt, for all countries basically, and inflation and all these macro issues are really seeping into even your individual stock analysis, which I've
Mm-hmm.
always been kind of an individual stock focused investor, not so much a macro investor. But now you just it's like it's permeating all of your investment decisions. It's front page news. It was when I first started out and we had Greenspan and Bernanke and all these guys, you just felt like the can was always just going to kick down the road. It really
Mm-hmm.
felt that way. It doesn't feel that way anymore. It feels like they're trying to kick the can down the road, but the can is just too heavy and they can't kick it down anymore. And it's taking over kind of the action in the bond market. It's taking over equity action. It's kind of putting a premium on gold, and I think Bitcoin. One of the really interesting developments I thought, and maybe it's not sustainable, but during the tariff tantrum, everything most stocks went down. There was a pretty quick drawdown in the stock market when President Trump announced those very high tariffs. Um, Bitcoin actually started to behave like a safe haven. And it was really just Bitcoin and gold. And I thought that was super encouraging. I thought that was kind of a seminal moment where you could say that people are finally coming around to seeing Bitcoin as a place to park their money in times of distress. And so that moment for me was just continuing that progression I have toward, wow, this is something that isn't as risky as I originally thought.
Yeah, it seems like it definitely kind of solidified itself as like a store of value to a lot of people
Yeah.
during that time, which I think is really encouraging as well. But you mentioned like the overall economy, right? And I'm curious kind of what you think of that as, obviously, you've got your company and everything like that, and it seems like every single earnings call people are kind of bringing up the overall macro. We've got Trump saying lower interest rates,
Hmm.
and Powell trying to stay a little bit higher. Higher for longer has been his calling card for a while now. So I'm curious, like, what you think and how you're viewing it, just based on maybe it's you got to be a little cautionary here. Like, how are you kind of viewing the overall macro economy right now?
Yeah, I've been reading a lot about companies and their comments on earnings calls and taking in a lot of commentary. I would say it's mixed, right? I'd say that there are pockets of strength and pockets of weakness, and that it's a bit sensitive and fragile because we haven't seen the effects of the tariffs, and in a significant way, there's, I think, some concern that we're going to see that, and that that could have an impact on consumers soon, right? It just kind of hasn't flowed through yet. So I think the market is apprehensive about the potential negative impact of tariffs, even at these levels. And then I guess, within the beginning of July, we're supposed to finally address the final tariffs, right? President Trump, postponed his decision until I think July 9th. So you have some key kind of deadlines and milestones coming up that could really impact the economy. And it's tough for the Fed because they're very focused on inflation, which has actually come down a lot. And in normal times you would think the Fed should be lowering rates when you see the CPI coming down like it has. But the Fed's obviously concerned about this potential tariff impact and having an inflationary impact. So it's a mixed signal time. At the same time, it's interesting. The market is, its own animal, and it does whatever the hell it feels like doing from time to time. And the sentiment to me is still pretty negative. So you have to ask yourself, how much of these concerns I'm raising are factored into the stock market? And I feel like a lot of the negativity that's out there, the bearishness, is somewhat priced in, even though the markets kind of bounce back really well. I think you see there's a lot of caution, just in terms of way stocks trade, kind of the typical analysts you talk to on different stocks. You kind of get the sense that people are worried and not positioned for a rally whatsoever. So I kind of like that setup. I like the idea that people are kind of expecting the worst or a pretty negative scenario coming in, and they could be right, but also it may be priced in.
Yeah, and I think it's also kind of interesting, like what you lined out a little bit earlier, where it's like gold and Bitcoin during the tariff, even though it was like only a couple months, performed pretty well. And, allegedly, like everybody was saying, a recession is inevitable. Some people are saying we're in a recession. Who really knows? But I think it's going to be a very interesting time right now to almost test that theory of how Bitcoin would do relative to like a poor economy. Because if you look at the previous bull markets, we've had Bitcoin essentially just in, decent economy, low interest rates every single time. Of course, we had, the COVID boom and everything like that. But I'm curious kind of how you think Bitcoin is going to react as we get into this more developed market, because back then there was no institutions, no governments talking about Bitcoin. Now we're here. Of course, we have a higher market cap, but how are you looking at just how Bitcoin will potentially perform in this?
It's interesting. I think Bitcoin could really outperform because it's not affected by tariffs per se. You have the strategic Bitcoin reserve conclusionary, reports coming out soon, right? That according to the timeline they drew up, we should be hearing something soon about what the government's planning to do. You have legislation out there that could be very powerful for Bitcoin, and you have an asset, a commodity that doesn't report earnings. Like you said earlier, it doesn't have any numbers to report, so it may be kind of immune from kind of this concern about whether earnings are up or down. For Bitcoin, that's irrelevant, and it could really take off. It could be its own thing, and be a safe haven, but also kind of a growth investment, right? It's interesting. It has a little bit of the beta of tech in it, but it also has the safe harbor nature of gold, and it doesn't have it doesn't suffer from kind of the impact of tariffs, and it's being buoyed by massive demand from corporations and potentially from governments. So it's probably one of the best fundamental stories you'll find in a situation where people are really worried about the economy or the consumer. It could really stand out.
The best place to buy Bitcoin in the United States and Canada is the Bitcoin Well. You could go to the bitcoinwell.com green candle and sign up today, and they will give you wishing well tokens. They are one of the only exchanges in the United States that will give you free sats every time you buy Bitcoin. You have a chance to win 1 million sats every time you buy. You get wishing well tokens. You flip the coin down the wishing well, and you have the chance to win 1 million sats. You heard me here, folks. 1 million sats. And on top of that, they have the absolute best over-the-counter service where you can make purchases over $50,000, and they will walk you through the whole thing. They have the best rates in the United States and in Canada. And on top of that, they have the best white glove service where they will take you through those giant purchases just so you feel comfortable. You'll get it in cold storage, and it's strictly non-custodial. They are saying, we want you to experience the true power of Bitcoin and that self-custody. So go to the well, sign up, bitcoinwell.com/green candle today. Enough for me, back to the show.
Yeah, and I mean, I definitely think that that's where things are going, right? I mean, everybody from Bitcoin, way back when, everybody was like, oh, it's going to be the store of value. It's going to be the store of value, but it was kind of the Wild West, 6-7 years ago. But now it seems to be institutionalized, and, that's kind of, where we're at. We're at this bigger market cap. So I'm curious, do you think as, the volatility is potentially going down? That's what everybody's saying. I still think there's going to be some. Maybe we could dive into that in a second. Yeah. But do you think that that's going to play a factor as traditional finance? I mean, I've heard Matthew Siegel of Van Eck basically say, hey, now that the volatility is going down, maybe we allocate that 1 to 2 to 5% or 25 basis points even, as low as that. So do you think that that is something that traditional finance, maybe businesses, other areas are looking at? They're hoping for that volatility to go down almost?
Yeah, I think they're getting more comfortable with it. I think it does feel like the volatility is going down. And ironically, I think that's a good opportunity for Bitcoin corporations like ours, because there is kind of a desire for higher volatility. Our volatility is elevated. I think it was over 100. Now it's around 80% volatility. I think there's a kind of a group of investors who will want to see kind of higher volatility, a higher volatility way to invest in Bitcoin. But I do think that it will make it more of a mainstream, Bitcoin itself, more mainstream as volatility comes down. I think the volatility has to kind of come down over time, right, as it gets more accepted and institutionalized. So if you want a higher return on that, maybe you invest in Semler, someone that's levered to Bitcoin. The really interesting aspect of this MNAV debate is that I don't think enough people recognize that, if you're a fund manager in the United States at least, you can't buy Bitcoin. You can't buy the ETFs. There are mandates where they can only really own individual stocks. And if you think about the stocks that they can own, there aren't that many, right? There's MicroStrategy or Strategy. They might be able to buy Metaplanet, though it's on the pink sheets in the U.S. So there's really a dearth of opportunities. So to the extent that you are a Bitcoin treasury equity and you need to have kind of a 5 to 10 billion market cap to kind of get into a lot of the big funds in the United States. You're unique, like Strategy. That's an opportunity for us. It should be justify a much higher MNAV if we can get into that realm, which is a big goal of ours.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you guys are on a good path for there. And I think that, everything's going to start to, but you said a phrase earlier saying that you don't know what inning the traditional finance is in. Yeah. You're in New York now, man. I got to ask you about it. So are you a baseball fan? Are you a Yankees or Mets fan? Or are you like a sports guy up in New York?
I'm as zealous a baseball fan, I think, as there's ever been in the world. I unfortunately grew up in a town where there was no baseball team. I grew up in Portland, Oregon. Okay. So I always liked whoever a guy named Lee May played for. He played for the Orioles and the Astros and the Royals. And so I just rooted. I was a fan of whatever team he played on. I loved his baseball card. I was like 6 years old and saw his baseball card. And from that moment on, I became a big baseball card collector and just couldn't get enough of it. Played baseball, played 1 year in college. All my kids played. I actually set up a foundation to help hundreds of kids in the Bronx get college baseball scholarships, mostly Dominican kids. I spent a lot of time coaching, like 15 years coaching at a high level, helping kids get recruited. It's just been a huge passion of mine. But I am a Yankees fan. I'm married to a Yankees fan, someone who grew up in the Bronx. I live in the Bronx.
Yeah.
And so it's important to see the Yankees do well in our family. We have big Yankee fans.
Yeah, that's awesome. Wow, I wasn't expecting it. Like, what position did you play?
I kind of played everywhere, but my best position was probably, second base, catch. I caught a lot. I loved catching. I loved being kind of the leader of the team and calling the pitches. So big part of it. I broke a few fingers doing that. But, I was a much better hitter than fielder. In my senior year in Portland, I went to a public school called Lincoln High School. I led the entire city in hitting. I hit 5'10". And
5'10"?
Yeah, I hit 5'10" my senior year.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, I ended up going to play baseball at Dartmouth.
Well, congratulations!
Thank you. Yeah. And then it was not an easy. It was a grind playing baseball in college. I had to get up super early every morning, and I realized, I don't know if this is my future.
Yeah.
Maybe I should gotta focus on some other things. And actually, I got really obsessed with the nuclear issue. Back then, that was like the topic du jour. I mean, still is, but like there was a lot of tension between the Soviet Union and the United States. And so I spent a lot of my college time doing a lot in that space. I was a Russian major. I wrote a book called The Language of Nuclear War my sophomore year with two friends, and it got published by Harper and Row. We went on the Today Show. I went to work for the State Department and Arms Control Conference in Stockholm. I worked for the United Nations Department of Disarmament in Geneva. I became very, very focused on the nuclear issue. I still am, but at that time I was very concerned about our future as it related to nuclear war.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So my dad played in college as well.
Oh, really?
Not quite D1. I ran track. My eyesight's not great, so he was always pushing me to play baseball. But eventually I found track, and I ran in college as well.
What did you run?
I ran cross country and then the steeplechase, if you could believe it.
Gosh,
so if
wow.
you guys see me standing, I'm vertically challenged is the way I like to put it. And it's like these wood barriers. There's a video on me on the internet falling over one of those.
Oh, my God.
Hopefully nobody's going to find that now. But
That's treacherous.
Yeah, exactly. But you mentioned the baseball cards and kind of like the athletic background. I'm curious kind of what you think, because baseball cards were kind of like the original scarcity, right? Like a lot of people, the collectors, that kind of stuff. Is that something that resonated with you with Bitcoin, that you almost understood that for a little bit, like kind of, almost relating it back to your upbringing?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I was always blown away by the scarcity of certain cards, the Honus Wagner card especially, and I was always attracted to those things that were kind of, in low supply. Still am, but the finite nature of Bitcoin is a pretty powerful concept. So like when a lot of people come to me and say, what about this coin or that coin or that?
Yeah.
And it's just that there's so many attributes of Bitcoin, but the finite deflationary concept behind it is so powerful and does create this sense of, that there's something unique about it that separates it from every other digital asset.
Yeah, 100%. And I definitely think that, there's always going to be like Bitcoin treasury companies. There's going to be no altcoin treasury companies. I mean, maybe there will, but they're
trying.
Good luck to them. Right?
It's not without trying.
Yeah, exactly. But, I want to get back to New York a little bit because it is so unique. And you're from literally the opposite side. So I grew up in Austin. They always compare Portland and Austin pretty closely, but New York's food scene is unbelievable.
It is.
So you got to tell me if you were gonna eliminate one, the New York hot dog or the New York pizza, which one are you eliminating?
I don't eat red meat.
Okay.
So I'm eliminating the hot dog, but that's tough for me.
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, I love hot dogs, but I stopped eating red meat a while ago. So I'm going with the pizza. And I'll tell you, I had some of the best pizza I've ever had in Prague yesterday, just randomly.
Really?
In the main old town square, my wife and I sat down and ordered some pizza that looked amazing, and it was as good as any pizza I've ever had
You can't say that too loud. People in New York are going to get upset with you.
Yeah, they are. And Italy.
Yeah, exactly. So then, all right, here in Prague, what are you looking forward to? Obviously, we were here in this great city, country, and everything. I know you're having a little bit of a quick trip, but is there anything like you're kind of going to see, sightsee, anything like that?
Well, I'm really fired up to meet this whole aspect of the Bitcoin community that I probably have never met before. I think there's going to be so many people here that I'm meeting for the first time and hearing the story for the first time, and I love getting their perspective. So that's great. I think it just opens up this whole new group of people to us, and I'm really looking forward to that. I'm really looking forward to seeing Michael Saylor speak. I'm also hoping to spend some private time with him. I always value his advice. He's nobody better for advice than him, and he's just been such a phenomenal supporter of ours that I just feel so fortunate for that. In Prague itself, God, the weather here is so beautiful. It's got to be it's like a fantasy land. It just looks like a fairy tale city. I've spent a decent amount of time here over the years as an investor. I used to invest a lot in Eastern European media companies. There's a company here called TV Nova that I used to be an investor in. So I have a strong affinity for Prague. I think it's truly one of the most beautiful places in the world. I'll never turn down an opportunity to visit Prague. So I'm thrilled that they're having the conference here. I wish I had more downtime to walk around, but I'm sure we'll find time. I'd love to go to a music concert in one of the churches, hear some of the classical stuff. I love that aspect of Prague.
Yeah, it's just such a beautiful historic city. Like that's one thing I've noticed just walking around. It's like they're saying, "Oh, this building was built in year 1000."
I know.
And there's rumors that it was built like 300 years before that, and you're like, "Wait a second. This is insane. It's still here and it's got some of the bones and everything like that." Have you had any of the good Czech beer yet? I
haven't had it yet. No,
Not
I got to
yet.
get there. I got to get there.
Well, you got to wait till after the conference, I guess.
What are some of your favorites?
I mean, I just went and I don't know. I'm just like, just give me a local one. And I was like, I don't know, man. It's just every time I come over to Europe, I always want to try the local beer, and it's
so good.
It's definitely different than what we've got in the States, to say the very least. But
Yeah.
You've been very generous with your
Thank
time,
you.
so I really appreciate you coming on. Why don't you tell people where they can find out more about you and more about Semler Scientific?
Sure. I'm on X at Semler Eric, and I'm pretty active. I like to kind of keep people posted on what Semler's doing. And you can also go to our website, which has our dashboard. It shows, our key metrics. It's semlerscientific.com.
All right. Yeah, put all that in the show notes. So thank you guys all for coming out. And Eric, thanks so much,
Thank you.
man.
It was great. I really enjoyed it.